My name is V. I go by they, them pronouns, and I am a community manager slash editor-in-chief of a queer publication. And we are here today to talk about grad school and if you should go to grad school or not. So do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi. Hello? Okay. Hi, I'm Christy. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. I'm in between roles at The Hollywood Reporter. I was in social media, and now I'm going to be working as an associate editor. And yeah, I went to grad school. I went to Columbia Journalism. I graduated in 2020.
Hi, I'm Kenzie. I am she, her pronouns, and I am the senior digital marketing specialist for Discovery Education. And I studied my master's in communication and media studies at Rutgers University, and I graduated in 2021. And Jay.
Hi, everyone. My name's Naomi Lilly. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the CEO of a company called Now Media. We connect diverse creative professionals to mentors in the media industry. I graduated from Duke University in 2020. I'm currently in grad school getting a dual MBA, MA in communications from Johns Hopkins University.
Amazing. I am also in grad school. I am doing an MA in communication and women and gender studies in technology. And I think we can all share the experience of the past 2 years blurred, complete blur. And we started thinking, what should our next steps be? Should we go to grad school? Should we focus on our careers? So to open the floor, why did you go to grad school?
Okay, I'll start. So I was very anti-school after college. I was like, I'm not going back to school. I don't need that. And then a year later, I had read a story in CNN's online bureau from a convention in Atlanta, and I was like, I could visualize every single thing that was at that convention. I was like, I need to be able to write like this. I need to be able to help the people who read my stories visualize the way that they do, or the way that I did. And I was like, I can't do that on my own, so I need to go to grad school. And yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. I definitely wasn't expecting to, and it worked out.
I was kind of the opposite when I was a senior in college. I was like, I'm not ready to graduate. I think I should go to grad school. But instead, I decided to take a minute and jump into the real world. And I had actually graduated with journalism. And I ended up in a social media digital marketing role. And I kind of just felt like I understood everything that was going on. I knew I had this creative knack, and I knew that I could do everything really well, but I couldn't necessarily explain why it worked or how it worked. I just knew I knew how to do it. So I kind of just, as I was going along, in order to sort of feel like maybe I could be more of an expert or move up in my career, I decided I think I should go back and kind of work backwards and say, like, okay, I know these concepts, but why do these concepts happen? How does this happen? So I kind of went back to filling gaps.
Yeah, so personally for me, I knew that I wanted to get my MBA, but I didn't know when I was going to do that. And I wanted to do it for the sole purpose of how do I be a better founder. And my previous job, before I started doing my company full-time, was working at Depop. For folks who don't know, marketplace for vintage fashion. And my manager at the time was like, Naomi, you're such a great communicator. You know how to connect with people so well. And I was like, yeah, I actually do that very well. So I started thinking, and I was like, okay, I'd love to be in a classroom setting where I could learn more of those practical skills versus the experiential skills. And as a result, that's when I started looking for programs. Johns Hopkins was the only place with a program that was in communications, that was online, that was part-time. And at the time, they also weren't requiring you to do tests in order to get in, and I'm a terrible test taker. So I went on a whim and applied, and in a month, found out I got in, and I've been doing it since August of last year.
Yeah, I think we all apply when you just go like, yeah, let's see what happens after. But I want to ask you, Mackenzie, you were gonna go in between of should I apply, should I not apply? Were there any key indicators that stop you from applying, or the opposite? Were there any key indicators that push you to apply?
Like when I was graduating? I had transferred schools when I was an undergrad, so I feel like I always sort of felt behind. Like I never truly caught up to some of the other students my age, because I just always felt like, oh, I was a freshman twice in a way, like even though I never fell behind credit-wise. I was just like, so senior year, I was like, I'm not ready for this. I need one more year, but then I kind of finally was like, okay, I think I'm just pushing off the inevitable of like, I don't necessarily know what a career looks like. And like, I did a ton of internships and I was like, okay, I think like the only way to figure it out is to do it and then see, because even at the time I was like, what would I even apply for? What do I want to do? So I kind of was like, all right, before I spend all this money, let me go and like actually figure out what careers are like. And kind of like what Hannah was talking about and what she just spoke about, like until you're in it, you don't know which wave to ride. So if you don't know exactly what you want out of something, like your graduate school is nothing like undergrad. Like truly, like I think I just was like, I want that victory lap. And like grad school is not a victory lap. It's work. And especially with like working full time. So it was definitely like, I needed that space to actually figure out what I wanted to do.
And you touched on financials. Did you look into, and this is a question for all you three, did you look into finance programs, any scholarships, or how did you found your postgraduate program?
I can start if you want. Okay, so I was lucky enough that my parents lived locally to the city, so I moved home after college and just started really saving. I wasn't sure what that savings was going to go to, but I knew that spending it on rent when I could commute to the city would get me something down the line. And so by the time I was going back to school, I think I waited 3 years after graduating. I had enough that I could have paid for my program full out. Like that was always my goal, was if I'm going to go back to grad school, I want to make sure that I could, if they asked for me like up front, I would be like, cash, here you go. And then I was also lucky enough when you start working full time, especially if it's something within your kind of career or industry within your department, a lot of places have programs that do reimbursement. So actually the company I was working for at the time, and then my current one now, helped pay for it. So every semester I would submit my grades to HR and like my report card, and they would actually in my paycheck reimburse me part of my tuition money.
Yeah, that's really cool. When I applied to schools, I got a couple of scholarships, so that's always a good part to help you sort of finance what you need to do, or saving up is also really great. That's like the best thing you can do. I mean, there's always loans, but if you can avoid getting them, like obviously that's better. Local colleges will sometimes have grad programs for cheaper, which is helpful, especially if it's just you want to learn more and you don't need to go to like a fancy university, or any like university colleges like do plenty of things like that. But yeah, yeah.
I'm a loans girl. I was privileged enough that in undergrad, my parents helped significantly with tuition and had quite a few scholarships that helped me get through. But we kind of had an agreement of, if you do any secondary schooling, it's going to be on you. And as a result, I'm on the Federal Education Board site almost every quarter asking for a Grad Plus loan. So it is what it is, but alas.
I'm also doing loans, so. So I want to know, in my experience, my program is completely different from what I imagined it or how it's described, at least in structure, classes, kind of like how I'm gonna use it after I graduate. Let's talk about that. Is your program similar to how it's painted in paper, or did it change? Were your expectations completely like met, or like were they not at all?
Go ahead. Okay. So my program is not at all how I thought it was going to be. Part of the reason I wanted to go to school was to get some of the book knowledge of what does a communications professional look like, what does a business professional look like. And I think so much of my time has been this realization of like, maybe I didn't need to do this to be successful in what I'm doing. Not to say that there's not bits and pieces that I feel like I can take away, but I think so much of that book knowledge is very behind of what the actual scene looks like of even being a business owner. For instance, what it looks like to raise money, what it looks like to, be into your accounting as you're raising, and XYZ are just things that I have learned now many times through trial and error that I feel like maybe my teachers don't understand as well. especially from the business angle. Many of them haven't been founders, so it's kind of like, oh, there's a gap there. But at this point, it's like I'm 5 classes away from getting the MBA portion, so it's like, okay, I'll keep pushing through, even though maybe you don't know what you're talking about, but.
Yeah, I get that. And I would also just add that, like, I think if you're looking at programs, like, a lot of times there'll be a degree and then, like, I had a specialization. Really reading, like, the fine print, or like I said, for me, a lot of it was like, you don't know something until you're doing it. So I studied digital media as my specialization, thinking like, oh, that makes sense. I work in social media. Like, this must be the one, plain and simple. And when I got in, I realized a lot of my courses were more about theory and like writing a lot of papers, which, like, I'm a nerd, so I was like, all right, I'm down with this. Like, I did an entire thesis on like TikTok, and like literally was like watching TikToks and recording data, and I was like, okay, I'm in my group, I like this. But if you're someone who was like, I just wrote papers for 4 years, I don't want to write another one, I wanted a more practical, hands-on application of this in grad school, like, I realized through taking electives and things like that, like, that was actually a different specialization, and it was more in PR and public relations, and I was like, oh, that I guess it also would have made sense. And like, you're halfway through and you're like, well, I guess I don't change it now, but I'll just take more of these courses. So there is a lot of flexibility too. Like, don't like think like, oh my gosh, I've picked this, I've got to stick with it, like, this is it. And then you're halfway through and you've spent all this money, you're like, I messed up, I can't believe this. Like, there's a lot of flexibility, and I will say grad school, it's like smaller programs, you can talk to your professors and your advisors more, and there's a lot more like real world applications, so I think a lot of it can be adapted or malleable to what you're trying to get out of it, which is really nice, and there's a lot of more, I think, flexibility than, say, undergrad, so don't put too much pressure on it.
Yeah, I definitely second what Mackenzie was saying. Our grad program was very, very hands-on, very real life, very like, you're going to be doing these things as reporters, so you should learn how to do them as students. It was very intense, and I think I knew that grad school would always be intense, but I don't think I knew exactly how intense. And I think it depends on the length of the program also. Our program was only 9 months, so it's like you have to get a lot of stuff in to only a few months. And so, but it was very real world. Like, a lot of the things that I learned in grad school, I've been able to apply to like my current job and like jobs since then in general. So it's definitely not as fun as undergrad, but it can help you sort of find your footing more in like the career that you're trying to have. And I think that was like a really good transition for me specifically between undergrad and like real world. I was like, okay, 1 more year of school, that's like also kind of real world, but like not right away, right when I was 22 or whatever. So yeah, I think that was for sure my sort of experience. I knew it would be difficult, but definitely not as like intense and like time consuming as it was.
No, and I would also just suggest, if you know anyone in the program you are intending to apply to, talk to them. No, there's no limit of questions you can ask them, because this is most likely going to be your money. You're going to be investing, and you should get the information that you need. I have a question for Mackenzie and Christy. Now, let's talk like post-grad. Has your program affected your career? And we can talk about titles, we can talk about pay, or in general, like knowledge-wise. Have you experienced any, level up, let's say that, in your careers after post-graduation?
Okay. That's a good question. I think in certain careers, like getting a master's, like if you're a teacher, a master's usually like, for at least in New Jersey, like there's a pay scale, and if you have a master's, it directly affects your pay. Like it's like very strategic, and like there's a system. I would say in like media, there's sort of less of that. I would say like I was job searching while in grad school, so I was in a full-time role and then I switched to another one. And I feel like at least in that interview process, like being in grad school at that time or having a master's was something I could talk about. It showed I wanted to be an expert in that field. I'm learning more about it, and like I think in those ways it was more influential talking about it versus like because I have a master's, I get paid 10% more than someone else. Like, I haven't necessarily experienced that myself. Someone else might have, and if they did, good for them. Show me how you did it. But I would definitely say, like, you can use it to your advantage. It came with a lot of networking, and it definitely came with a lot of knowledge. I think, like I said, I was someone who kind of fell into my career and kind of got there and was like I said, I'm a nerd. So when I couldn't put like the vocabulary behind it, or I couldn't necessarily like be as much of an expert as I wanted to consider myself, going back, at least for me, has put a lot more confidence in what I do. It's definitely helped me feel more legitimate, I guess. And then just using that as I progress in my career, I'm more confident to like step up and move into a role, or, you know, expect a promotion versus like hoping for one.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a lot of that hit home with me too. For me specifically, I think it depends on your field. I'm in journalism, and I feel like journalism is very much not a field that you need a master's degree per se. It's if you want to go back and you want to do that for yourself, which I did, it can definitely make you feel more legitimate, and feel like you know more of like what you need to know to succeed. But it's not like you can't be a lawyer without going to law school. So it really depends on your own field. And for me, I feel like it hasn't made a huge impact in me in that respect, where I'm like, I needed this to like get to where I am today. Like from a job perspective, I needed it for myself to feel like I could get to that point. But not like for my job itself. There have been people in my company who are like, oh my gosh, Christy has like a master's in journalism. I would have never known. I'm like, okay, thanks, I guess. But yeah, so it's like, it's more for yourself, I think, at least in my field, it is more for yourself, where it's like, I can succeed more so with this for me, but I don't necessarily need it to move along in my career.
Do you want to comment on? No? Okay, awesome. So one last question, and to open the air. If you could give yourself advice prior to getting into your program, what would it be? And this can be on, you know, the actual program, on financial. You can talk about whatever.
If I could give myself advice, it's not good advice, so I wouldn't tell anybody to take this advice. I have been overloading every single semester so that I can finish 2 degrees in 2 years versus the 3 to 5. And I wish I had started overloading sooner than later. Like, I started my second semester versus my first because my advisor was like, we only recommend students take 2 classes a semester, and I think you should really pace yourself. And like, I took her advice even though I felt I could do it. And then after, I was like, I should have just started overloading. So I typically take 6 courses every semester, which is synonymous to a full-time student, and I'm part-time. But I tend to do things where I overwhelm myself. So again, I wouldn't take that advice. That's just what I would tell myself.
I can go. I think just like the only advice I would really give to myself looking back would just be that the only person you're in a race with is yourself. Like, stop comparing. I think a lot of like the pressure I put on myself, wanting a master's degree or anything kind of in my career, was I was sort of comparing myself to either people I saw on Instagram or now TikTok, and just all of these different external things. And when I look back, I kind of like laugh at myself. I'm like, you weren't racing anyone. Like, you did this for you. Like, know your intention when you're going in, and like, make sure that you're doing it for you, and make sure that you're doing it to get what you want out of it. And like, you get there. You will come through in whatever you choose, grad school, like whichever career, however you want to get there, you're gonna get there, I promise. But like, if I could even just go back and tell even myself at 25, which, yeah, I'm older than that, I would just say, like, stop racing towards this finish line that you've created. And like, the finish line can move. You're just gonna keep pushing it back. But yeah, know your intentions, and set them wisely, and set them for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's definitely great advice, Mackenzie. And But I guess for me, it was more so like, if I were to go back to my 22-year-old self, I would say basically just like take it one step at a time, like take a beat. Like the program that we were in was like very like, they were like, you can't work while you're here. Like you need to dedicate every single minute of your life to this program. And I was like, do I though? Like, yes, okay, fine, I'll dedicate a lot of my time to this, but like I also need to have a life, and I think that that was something that I struggled with a bit. I was like, I can't go hang out with some people from my program. I need to report at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And so it was kind of just like allowing myself the space to like enjoy this program and also do the work that I need to do to like finish the program strong. And I think that that's very much a me problem. I like put a lot of pressure on myself and I'm like, I have to do this right now. And it's like sort of that finish line that we all have in our head that's like, oh, by 25, I need to have a full-time job and I need to have a 401k and all those big adult words. And it's just like, hold on, you can give yourself some more time. Like you don't need to have, again, that timeline, like Mackenzie was saying. But yeah, just like I would tell myself, just give yourself a second to sort of be in the moment and experience what you're experiencing. And also put in the work, because you can do both.
Is this working? Yeah. Is this working? Oh, is it working? Yeah. Fully agree with what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, and just have to finish up with saying, this is your marathon to run. You don't have to run the whole thing. You can walk, you can jog, you can sprint. And like we mentioned earlier, trust the process is your process. Now, I just want to open the floor for some questions from the audience. If there are some grad school questions, you can go ahead and ask them now.
My question is, my name's Ellie, by the way. I'm her campus's social editor, if anyone was wondering. So my question is, did any of you, ever feel like really ready to step into grad school? Like you've gone through college, you know what that's like, but grad school is like a totally different game. And like, I know you, Mackenzie, had said like, okay, you didn't want it to end, so maybe you felt more prepared, but did you guys ever feel ready to like take that next step or like do the applications? Like, scary.
I can go, yeah. Yeah, like I said, I wasn't ready for the real world, and then I took on the real world, and then I really wasn't sure if I was then ready to add grad school back into that mix. That was definitely like what I was worried about. I would say I might have walked in a little overconfident, actually, because working full-time and going to school part-time was definitely a wake-up call. I always joke, like, I never thought my 20s would be writing papers on a bus at 7 in the morning going into my big girl job. It was, and like to Christina's point, like you're trying to say like, oh, do I go to happy hour? Do I hang out with my friends? Like I have to see my family and I also have this paper due. Like all of a sudden it becomes this really big balancing act, and that I was not prepared for in terms of like just prepared to be like, oh, I can go back to school. Like you got that little nervous of like, oh, I haven't written, like for me, I hadn't written a paper in like 3 years. So I was like, oh, I hope I remember how to do this. Or like, I hope I remember how to like submit homework. Like, you know, how do I log back onto Canvas? But in terms of like being prepared to like take that back on was not anything that I had thought it would be, but it all worked out. Like if you, all of a sudden it's like riding a bicycle. You're like, okay, I remember how to do this. Like you're good.
Submit the homework.
Yeah.
Yeah, for my, is it working? Okay, y'all can hear me? Okay, cool. So for myself, I graduated in 2020. We went home for spring break in March. We never came back. So I wouldn't necessarily say I was ever ready per se, but I was in a space of like, life is throwing a lot of things at me. Why not just do the next thing? And I think with that being said too, I was used to having to overload everything in my life. Like every year of college, I worked multiple jobs. My senior year, I worked 3 jobs, did school, and then was running my company. So it didn't feel like something I wasn't going to be able to handle. I just didn't know what it was going to look like. And, you know, now that I'm in it, I am normally the youngest in all of my courses. And I think in some ways it has advantages because I do have the simple skills of like, okay, I know how to read these instructions and like automatically apply myself in a way that my classmates aren't always able to do. So I think in some ways like that's made it easier. But I don't know if I ever walked into it like, I'm definitely ready for this. But like you said, I'm in it now, and it's like, okay, I can deal with the punches.
So, okay, I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, over there.
Hey guys, I'm Nicole. I'm a student journalist, so my question is for Christy. I was just wondering, do you feel that going to J school at the grad level gave you more of a jump start into reaching that larger market, having a career in like a higher sort of status, as opposed to maybe the traditional route of going through the local media and then like sort of working your way up? What are your thoughts on that?
Hello? Okay, wow, this is so much louder. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, just sort of like, do you think that going to journalism grad school made you have like more of a jump start into that larger market as opposed to working your way up through local media?
I will tell you, I think journalism is one of those industries you do not need to go to grad school to succeed and sort of get far along. I think it's definitely if you feel like you want to channel your skills more and hone your skills more in a sort of non-local level, I think that it's definitely a good place to go with that. I think you'll rise up either way, but you definitely don't need it. But if you think that like you need to go back to sort of like channel what you can do more to then make yourself more hireable, it's definitely something you could do, but I think you would learn a lot of the skills going through the local level, so I think it's more so like what you think you personally need. As an industry, you don't need it, so if that helps at all. But yeah.
Thank you.